The unsigned contract slid across Luca Moretti's black marble table and stopped beneath a maid's steady hand. 3 men stood opposite him beneath the amber chandelier, their tailored jackets carrying the stale odor of cigarettes and a long night on the highway. None sat down. Luca remained at the head of the table, one cuff resting beside an untouched espresso, while the grandfather clock cut the silence into measured pieces. 3 weeks, he said. His voice was low enough that everyone leaned toward it. 3 weeks, 6 meetings, and my best negotiators return with nothing but mileage. Vincent placed a leather folder on the table. The Harbor Light Community Center rejected the final offer. Double market value, Lucas said. New classrooms, repairs, jobs. They rejected all of it. Lucas' fingers stopped against the porcelain cup. Harbor Light occupied 1 brick building on less than an acre, but that acre sat between 2 warehouses his organization already controlled. Without it, trucks had to travel an extra 9 miles through inspected commercial roads. With it, the route became shorter, quieter, and far more profitable. The room smelled of furniture polish, hot coffee, and the rain drying on the men's wool coats. Naomi Carter moved silently along the wall, gathering empty glasses from an earlier meeting. Her gray uniform brushed the backs of the leather chairs. She had learned that men around Luca often mistook silence for absence. Vincent opened the folder. We increased the relocation allowance, guaranteed 5 years of operating funds, offered every board member a consulting position, and they said the center wasn't for sale. Luca looked toward the other 2 men. Did either of you remember how negotiation works? One lowered his eyes. The other stared at the veined marble. Luca leaned back, the leather giving a soft groan beneath him. Even my best men couldn't negotiate it. A few capos near the fireplace gave restrained laughs. Naomi set down a crystal tumbler. The sound was small, but wrong enough to catch Luca's attention. Her gaze had fallen on the open contract. 1 paragraph was marked in red. All current programs would continue for 12 months, after which the purchaser retained sole discretion over the property's use, staffing, and access. Naomi's thumb remained against the cool glass. That clause, she said quietly, makes every promise before it temporary. The laughter vanished. Vincent turned first. No one asked the staff. Naomi lifted her eyes from the paper. If they believe the building will stop serving the neighborhood after 1 year, more money only confirms what they fear. Luca's expression did not change, but the room tightened around his silence. You read 1 paragraph while clearing glasses, he said, and now you understand what 3 experienced men could not. I understand what the paragraph says. A capo smirked into his drink. Luca glanced at Naomi's plain uniform, then at the men whose reputations had just been touched by her observation. Perhaps tomorrow, he said, you can dust the chandeliers and explain electricity. Soft laughter moved around the table again. Naomi did not lower her head. She folded the damp cloth once, precisely, and placed it beside the contract. No, sir, she said. I only thought you wanted to know why they keep saying no. Luca's jaw shifted. He tapped the page with 1 finger. The clause protects my investment. Their refusal is sentiment dressed as principle. He closed the folder, ending the matter with the weight of his palm. My men negotiated with everyone authorized to sign. Naomi gathered the final glass, but her eyes stayed on the names listed beneath the rejected offer. Board members, attorneys, property trustees. Not 1 person identified as a neighborhood representative. Not 1 name she recognized from the center's front steps. At the doorway, she stopped. Behind her, Luca ordered Vincent to prepare a more aggressive offer by morning. Naomi turned just enough for the chandelier light to catch the stillness in her eyes. Mr. Moretti, she said, who exactly did your men believe they were negotiating with? The clock struck once. No one laughed. The clock's last chime dissolved into the low hiss of the fireplace. Amber light moved across the black marble table, catching the rims of empty glasses and the silver tray, cooling beneath Naomi Carter's fingers. Vincent glanced toward Luca Moretti, waiting for him to dismiss the question with a gesture. Instead, Luca leaned back in his leather chair. The upholstery creaked in the silence. Choose your next words carefully, he said. Naomi lifted the final glass. A ring of condensation remained on the polished stone, directly beside the list of trustees. Your men spoke to the people who can transfer the deed, she said. That isn't what I asked. One of the capo's cuff links clicked against the table. Vincent's mouth tightened. We met the board president, both attorneys, and every authorized representative. There was no one else to negotiate with. Naomi folded the damp linen over her palm and wiped away the ring in one slow pass. Then why did every meeting end after the same clause was mentioned? Vincent opened the folder with more force than necessary. Paper scraped over marble. Because they're unreasonable. Unreasonable people argue, Naomi replied. These people stopped talking. The room changed around that distinction. Men who had spent weeks discussing percentages and signatures now looked down at the contract as if its pages had acquired another language. Luca's gaze sharpened. Naomi had not raised her voice, yet she had forced his entire table to reconsider the failure without changing a single number. He pointed at the folder. You read one clause and think you understand people my best men couldn't move? Heat from the fireplace pressed against Naomi's back. The tray's metal edge remained cold beneath her thumb. Speaking again could cost her the only steady work she had. Silence would preserve her place in the household, but it would also leave the real obstacle buried beneath legal language. She set the tray down. The soft contact sounded louder than Vincent's report had. Did your men negotiate with the person who owns the building, Naomi asked, or with the person the neighborhood trusts? No one reached for a glass. Beyond the tall windows, rain tapped steadily against the dark panes. Vincent scanned the names again, slower this time. Ownership, authorization, and trust had been treated as the same thing. Naomi had separated them with one question. Luca noticed the shift first. His negotiators were no longer studying her uniform. They were studying the gap in their own work. That loss of certainty irritated him more than open defiance would have. He rose, buttoning his charcoal jacket. The neighborhood does not sign contracts. No, Naomi said, meeting his eyes. But it decides whether Harbor Lights survives after one is signed. For a moment, the only sound was the faint pop of burning wood. Luca's jaw hardened. He could have questioned her, but that would have acknowledged that a woman carrying empty glasses had seen deeper into the dispute than the men seated at his table. Back to the kitchen, he ordered. Naomi picked up the tray. She did not apologize, and she did not lower her eyes. As she crossed the threshold, Vincent remained bent over the list of representatives, one finger motionless beside the blank space where a trusted neighborhood voice should have been. Luca watched him recognize it. Then the kitchen door swung shut, leaving Naomi on the other side, and one unanswered question inside the room. If she knew whom they should have approached, how much longer could Luca pretend she belonged nowhere near the negotiation? The kitchen door had nearly settled against its frame when Vincent's chair scraped across the hardwood. The sound cut through the muted clink of china and the warm smell of coffee drifting from the service corridor. Wait! Naomi stopped beneath the brass wall sconce, its amber light catching the silver rim of her tray. Through the narrowing doorway, Vincent stood with the representative list in his hand, but his eyes had shifted toward Luca. He said nothing more. He did not need to. The missing name on that page had already weakened every defense he had made. Naomi turned back before the door could close. Her shoes crossed the threshold with 2 measured taps, and she placed the tray on the sideboard instead of carrying it away. Luca remained at the head of the marble table, one hand resting beside the rejected contract. Firelight moved across his cufflinks. I gave you an order, he said, and I heard it. Naomi's voice stayed level. I'm asking for 10 minutes and 1 phone call. A capo near the windows released a dry laugh. Outside, rain ticked against the glass, cold and steady. Luca's gaze traveled from Naomi's empty hands to the men watching him. Letting her speak risked making him look indulgent. Refusing her now would make him look afraid of an answer. You believe 1 call can accomplish what 3 of my best men couldn't do in 3 weeks. I believe they kept asking the wrong people to sell something they don't own. Vincent's mouth tightened, but he did not interrupt. Naomi stepped closer to the table, stopping beyond the line of polished chairs. She did not touch the contract. The city can transfer a deed. A board can approve a sale. Neither can deliver the neighborhood's trust. Luca leaned back slowly. Leather creaked beneath him. And you can. I can reach the person who decides whether anyone in that neighborhood will honor what gets signed here. The laughter was gone now. Only the fire's soft crackle remained, mingling with the hum of the old refrigerator beyond the kitchen wall. Luca tapped one finger against the marble. Suppose I allow this performance. What do you offer when it fails? Naomi's eyes did not move. My position in this house. Vincent looked up sharply. One of the capos shifted his weight, the wool of his jacket brushing the chair behind him. Luca's finger stopped. Naomi drew the ring of household keys from her apron pocket. The metal was cool against her palm, each key earned through years of arriving before dawn and leaving after the last light went dark. She set them beside the contract. The small impact sounded louder than it should have. If I cannot get the real conversation started in 10 minutes, she said, I leave the estate tonight. No evidence. No documentation. No second request. This was no longer an opinion offered while clearing glasses. Naomi had converted Luca's dismissal into terms, collateral, and a clock. More dangerously, she had done it using the language his world respected. Luca looked at the keys, then at the ring of men around him. His pride had trapped him more cleanly than any contract clause. If he refused, everyone at the table would know the maid had named a risk he would not take. A thin smile touched his face, cold as the rain sliding down the windows. He removed his watch and laid it beside Naomi's keys. Bring her the secure phone, he told Vincent. Vincent crossed to the cabinet and retrieved a black handset reserved for business. No household employee was permitted to hear, much less conduct. Instead of giving it directly to Naomi, he placed it on the marble between her and Luca. The balance in the room shifted with that single motion. Luca pressed the timer on his watch. Red digits awakened beneath the crystal. 10 o'clock. You wanted the table, he said. Now you have it. Naomi pulled out the chair opposite him and sat beneath the full weight of every capo's stare. Vincent slid the representative list toward her. She left it untouched, lifted the receiver, and began dialing a number none of Luca's men had thought to ask for. The first tone sounded, then the second. Luca's timer dropped to 9:52, and the public test he had meant to control was already counting down against him. A soft click came through the secure handset, followed by the faint hum of fluorescent lights on the other end. The conference room smelled of cooling espresso and furniture polish as the timer slid past 9:40. Naomi held the receiver with both hands. Mrs. Ellis? It's Naomi Carter. Silence answered first. Then an older woman's voice, warm but guarded. Naomi, I wondered if you'd ever call Harbor Light again. Luca's gaze sharpened. Vincent lowered the representative list and mouthed the name to himself. Ruth Ellis appeared nowhere on it. I'm calling from the Moretti residence, Naomi said. I need to ask why the negotiations ended. A dry rustle of paper crossed the line. Because his men came into the center during our youth supper, Ruth replied. They measured the gym while children were still eating. One of them called our programs clutter and said the neighborhood should be grateful anyone wanted that old building. Vincent's jaw tightened. Across the table, one negotiator shifted against the leather chair. Its creak sounded unnaturally loud. We didn't know who she was, he muttered. You didn't ask, Naomi said. Her voice never rose. It did not need to. Ruth had founded Harbor Light 32 years earlier, after the abandoned warehouse beside the pier had become a place where children disappeared from school and families stopped walking after dark. She had turned it into classrooms, a kitchen, and a legal clinic. Years later, when Naomi's mother lost her apartment and every agency door seemed locked, Ruth found them shelter, food, and a path back to stability. The timer read 8:31 when Luca reached toward the speaker control. Naomi covered it with her palm. Before Mrs. Ellis hears another promise, I need the truth. The room cooled beneath the air conditioning vents. Harbor Light sits between the east docks and your warehouses, she continued. Is this purchase meant to protect the center or hide what moves through that corridor? Luca's fingers remained on the marble, a few inches from hers. That is not your concern. Naomi set the receiver down without ending the call. The black cord curled across the contract like a boundary drawn in ink. Then I'm done. A capo gave a short, incredulous laugh. Luca did not. You wagered your employment for 10 minutes, he said, each word measured. And I'm still willing to lose it. Naomi pushed her household keys toward him. Brass scraped stone. Mrs. Ellis fed my family when pride could not. I will not use her trust to turn Harbor Light into a front for criminal business. On the line, Ruth said nothing. Only the distant rattle of a service card and children's voices moving down a hallway could be heard. Luca glanced at his watch. 7:46. His own test was still running. Yet Naomi had withdrawn the one thing his men could not buy: access. Vincent stepped away from a wall and placed the failed proposal directly before Luca. His fingers settled over the clause Naomi had identified. Boss, he said quietly, if she hangs up, we lose the only person. Ruth Ellis answered. Naomi lifted the receiver again. Mrs. Ellis, I'm sorry for disturbing you. Luca closed his hand over the contract before she could end the call. The paper buckled beneath his ring. For the first time that evening, no one waited for Naomi to prove herself. Every man at the table waited for Luca to declare what Harbor Light was truly worth, and what he was prepared to surrender to earn the right to negotiate for it. The red digits on the timer fell to 7:31, painting a thin crimson reflection across the black marble. Beyond the sealed windows, rain ticked against the glass, while the secure handset carried the low electrical hiss of a connection not yet broken. Luca loosened his grip on the contract. Don't hang up, Mrs. Ellis. Naomi kept the receiver near her ear, but she did not offer it to him. Luca pulled the proposal toward himself and opened it to the clause beneath Vincent's finger. The paper rasped under his signet ring. Around the table, 3 capos watched him with the rigid stillness of men who had spent years learning which silences were dangerous. The acquisition plan is canceled, Lucas said. A chair creaked at the far end. One of the capos leaned forward. That property controls access to the harbor route. I know what it controls. Luca removed a silver fountain pen from his jacket. And I know what this document would destroy. He drew one hard line through the provision allowing Harbor Light's programs to be terminated after 12 months. Black ink bled slowly into the fibers. Then he crossed out the clauses granting his company's unilateral authority over staffing, security, and building access. Naomi's gaze followed the pen, steady and unsmiling. Crossed-out language can be restored in the final draft, she said. The room tightened around the words. Luca could have silenced her with a glance. Instead, he turned to Vincent. Bring me a clean writer. Vincent moved first. He opened a leather portfolio, removed a blank amendment sheet, and set it beside the ruined proposal. Luca began dictating. Harbor Light would remain a community center. Its food pantry, after-school programs, legal clinic, and youth services could not be closed, displaced, or reduced by any Moretti-controlled company. No commercial conversion could occur without written approval from an independent community board. The route would have to bend around those obligations, not erase them. Each sentence stripped profit from the original plan. Each stroke of Vincent's pen made the loss measurable. When the writer was finished, Luca read it beneath the amber chandelier light. The scent of wet wool and cold coffee lingered over the table. Add this, he said. Any violation voids the transfer and returns the property to the trust without compensation. Vincent looked up. That penalty was not symbolic. It placed the entire investment beyond Luca's control if his word failed. One capo slowly removed his hand from the table. Another stared toward the rain-dark windows, already calculating what their allies would call this surrender. Luca took the amendment and signed his full name at the bottom. Not an alias, not a shell company. Luca Moretti. The nib scratched loudly enough to fill the room. He pressed his thumb beside the wet signature, then slid the document across the marble toward Naomi. My authority stands behind those terms, he said. If anyone under my protection breaks them, the center keeps the property and my money. Naomi examined the signature without touching the page. "Mrs. Ellis," she said into the receiver, "you heard him." "I heard a powerful man make a promise," Ruth replied through the speaker. "That is not the same as giving the neighborhood power." The timer reached 5:58. Luca's men had just watched him trade leverage for honor. Yet the woman on the phone still had not agreed to negotiate. Naomi finally placed her fingertips on the amendment. Her household keys remained beside it, cold against the marble. "Then let me tell her why she can trust the person carrying that promise," she said. Vincent's eyes shifted toward her. Luca's pen stopped above the page. Naomi drew a slow breath, and the next thing she risked was no longer hers alone to lose. A faint burst of static moved through the speaker, and beyond the rain-streaked windows, harbor lights trembled across the black water. The conference room had grown cold. Even the espresso carried only a scorched, fading smell. At 5:41, Naomi pulled her household keys away from the contract and placed them in front of Luca. Then she reached into her apron and removed a worn Harbor Light volunteer card, its edges softened by years of handling. "Mrs. Ellis," Naomi said, her voice clear enough to reach every capo, "before you decide whether my word has value, they need to know why you stopped trusting it." Silence answered first. Luca lowered his pen. Vincent's hand remained suspended above the amendment. "Naomi," Ruth said at last, "you do not owe that room your wounds." "No, Naomi replied, but I'm asking you to risk Harbor Light on my judgment. I won't ask for trust while hiding the reason I lost yours." Her thumb crossed the faded photograph on the card. 7 years earlier, Harbor Light had employed her as a youth mediation coordinator. When grant money disappeared, a supervisor blamed Naomi for falsifying reimbursement forms. She had possessed copies that could have challenged the accusation, but releasing them would also have exposed confidential records belonging to families she had promised to protect. Naomi stayed silent, lost her position, and watched the allegation harden into neighborhood truth. No criminal charge had followed. That had not restored her name. "Mrs. Ellis defended me until my silence made her look dishonest," Naomi said. The brass clock clicked behind Luca, each movement thin and metallic. "I left before the board could dismiss me. I told myself I was protecting those families. What I really did was leave Ruth carrying my disgrace with no explanation." Ruth's breath passed softly through the speaker. "You disappeared." "I did." Naomi turned the volunteer card face up and slid it beside Luca's signed promise. "And I have spent 7 years trying to earn the right to come back." The timer reached 4:56. Luca looked at the maid whose advice he had dismissed, then at the evidence of a life none of his men had considered worth asking about. Yet he did not interrupt. This was no longer his concession to command. Naomi was placing her own credibility where his authority could not reach. "If these terms fail," she continued, "I leave this house tonight. But that is not the real cost. I will also withdraw my petition to return to Harbor Light's Mediation Council. Permanently. You will never have to defend my name again." Vincent's chair creaked as he leaned forward. "That petition is still active?" "Until midnight," Ruth answered. Naomi's jaw tightened, but her gaze remained fixed on the speaker. "I'm not asking you to forgive me because Mr. Moretti signed a document. I'm asking you to judge whether I have finally done what I failed to do 7 years ago. Tell the whole truth before someone else pays for my silence." The line became so quiet that the timer's electronic pulse seemed to fill the marble room. At 4:19, Ruth spoke. "I believe you about the past." Naomi's fingers loosened from the edge of the table. One old question had been answered, but Ruth's next words shut every door except the hardest one. "Believing you is not the same as trusting his structure. If Harbor Light is to negotiate, show me where the neighborhood can stop Luca Moretti after the ink is dry." Vincent immediately drew a clean sheet toward him. Luca turned the unsigned pages around. Naomi lifted the receiver, her future still balanced beside her keys. "Then keep the line open," she said. "We're going to put that power in your hands." The timer flashed 4:18, washing the clean sheet in thin red light, while the secure handset breathed softly against Naomi's ear. Cold air drifted from the ceiling vents, carrying the bitter smell of abandoned espresso across the polished mahogany table. "Before you write anything," Ruth said, You need to understand what we refused. Her voice had changed. It no longer carried the guarded weight of Naomi's past. This was the voice of Harbor Light's founder, measured and unyielding. We were never afraid of Moretti's money. We were afraid of what would follow it. Luca rested both hands on the unsigned documents. He did not interrupt. Around him, the capos shifted against the leather chairs as Ruth continued. 3 of your negotiators offered renovations, security, and twice the appraised value. But every proposal gave your organization control over hiring, after-school programs, and building access. Harbor Light serves teenagers who already know what hunger sounds like through an apartment wall. They know what quick money looks like on a street corner. A fluorescent fixture buzzed through the receiver. We believed your men wanted access to those children. Vincent's pen stopped above the paper. The accusation settled into the room without raised voices or slammed fists. Naomi looked directly at Luca. His jaw tightened once, but he turned the documents toward her and moved his hand away. That permission changed everything. Write this, Naomi told Vincent. The property will not be purchased as an operating asset. It will enter a preservation trust. Vincent lowered his pen. Its metal tip scratched rapidly across the page. Naomi drew the old acquisition agreement closer. The paper cooled beneath her fingertips and placed the blank sheet over its control provisions. Harbor Light keeps its independent board. The neighborhood elects the majority of trustees. Mr. Moretti may fund repairs, but he cannot appoint staff, select vendors, alter youth programs, access participant records, or use the building for recruitment, meetings, storage, or transportation. One capo exhaled sharply. Lucas silenced him with a glance, then slid his fountain pen toward Vincent. Make every restriction enforceable, he said. Naomi continued. Quarterly audits by an accountant chosen by the community. Public financial reports. Background checks for anyone entering youth areas. Any violation triggers immediate suspension of Moretti funding authority while the trustees seek an injunction. Ruth did not answer at once. Only the timer spoke. 3:11. Then came the dry rustle of paper from Harbor Light's office. And if the trust cannot afford to fight him? Ruth asked. Naomi tapped the penalty Luca had already signed. Legal fees are paid from an escrow account funded in advance by the buyer. The community won't need his permission to use it against him. Vincent looked up, recognition sharpening his face. Ruth had not been offered another promise. She had been handed a mechanism. Send me the draft, Ruth said. The scanner beside Vincent awakened with a low mechanical whir, its glass throwing blue light across the capo's motionless hands. A minute later, paper fed from the machine on Ruth's end. This gives us the power to stop him, she said. It does not tell me whether he will keep that power in the document when his own men object. A chair scraped hard against marble. One capo rose, his face rigid beneath the chandelier's white glare. You are giving strangers authority over our corridor, he said to Luca. The timer fell to 2:06. Luca's old plan remained beside his hand, intact, profitable, and ready to reclaim. The new trust waited before him in wet black ink. And now the threat to the agreement was no longer on the telephone. It was standing at his own table. Then we keep the corridor by force. The capo's voice struck the room harder than the chair had, cold and blunt beneath the chandelier's electric hum. Outside the tall windows, rain ticked against the glass. Inside, the air carried hot coffee, printer toner, and a metallic bite of men waiting for permission. Luca looked first at the speaker, then at the old acquisition plan beside his hand. Naomi stood across the table with one palm resting near the community trust draft, its paper still warm from the scanner. Harbor Light sits where our route must pass, the capo continued. We remove Ellis, take the building, and remind our allies that Luca Moretti does not surrender territory to neighborhood committees. Several men lowered their eyes. None contradicted him. The timer clicked down to 1:42. Luca lifted the old plan by its upper corner. Columns of projected revenue shimmered beneath the white light. Warehouse access, private offices, unrestricted control. Months of leverage reduced to clean black numbers. "You're asking me to break the commitment carrying my full legal name," he said. "I'm asking you to act like a boss." The capo planted both hands on the polished mahogany. "If that maid's document survives tonight, every ally we have will smell weakness." Naomi did not retreat. She slid the trust agreement toward Luca, the paper whispering across the wood. "Then decide which authority matters," she said quietly. "The kind people fear until your back is turned, or the kind your own signature cannot escape." Luca's eyes moved to the clause giving neighborhood-elected trustees independent oversight. Signing it would cost more than the center's profits. It would remove a strategic corridor from his private command, expose the property to public audits, and give ordinary residents the legal power to stop him. On the secure line, Ruth said nothing. Only the faint hiss of distance came through the speaker. Luca took the old plan in both hands. The first tier sounded small. The second ripped through the revenue projections. He tore again, splitting the unilateral control clause down the middle, then dropped the pieces onto the table like dead cards. "The route is finished." The capo's jaw tightened. "Then so are you, with men who understand this business." Luca reached inside his jacket, removed the man's access seal, and set it beside the shredded pages. "As of tonight, you speak for no crew, control no account, and enter no Moretti property." A hard silence followed. The capo stared at the seal, but Luca had already turned to Vincent. "Attach the independent oversight schedule. No private amendment. No successor may dissolve the trust. Transmitted under my full authority." Vincent's fingers moved over the keyboard. Keys snapped beneath them. The scanner drew in the pages with a low mechanical growl. Luca signed each marked line. Luca Antonio Moretti then pressed his seal into the final authorization. Wood ink gleamed beside Naomi's safeguards. Across the table, the expelled capo pulled away from his chair and walked toward the doors. No one followed him. Luca had surrendered the corridor, its profit, and part of the fear that held his organization together. The timer showed 43 seconds when Vincent sent the executed agreement. A confirmation tone sounded from Ruth's end. Naomi watched the green transmission light hold steady, but kept her hand near the phone. The power had shifted to Harbor Light. Now Ruth Ellis had to decide whether 7 minutes of enforceable sacrifice could outweigh years of distrust. The confirmation light pulsed green against the polished mahogany, while rain whispered across the tall windows, and the torn acquisition plan lay scattered like dead leaves on the carpet. From a speaker came only the faint rustle of paper. Naomi stood beside the phone, one hand resting on its cool brass edge. Luca remained at the head of the table, his seal darkening beside the name that had surrendered his control. "Mrs. Ellis?" Vincent asked. A clock ticked above the cold fireplace. Then Ruth's voice entered the room, low and steady. "I have the trust agreement." Naomi closed her eyes for one breath. Ruth read the provisions aloud. Neighborhood-elected trustees, independent audits, public reports, restricted access to minors, automatic injunction rights, and legal funds already placed beyond Luca's reach. Each clause stripped another weapon from any future attempt to seize Harbor Light. "This does not ask us to trust Mr. Moretti," Ruth said. "It gives us the power to stop him." Luca looked toward Naomi. Minutes earlier, he had treated her insight as kitchen chatter. Now an entire neighborhood held enforceable authority because she had refused to accept his promise without accountability. "Is it enough?" Naomi asked. Ruth did not answer immediately. The rain thickened against the glass, filling the silence with a soft metallic hiss. "The agreement is enough," she said at last. "But your wager was personal." Naomi's fingers tightened around the receiver. "I meant every word. If I fail Harbor Light again, I would withdraw my petition permanently." "You did not fail us," Ruth replied. "You made the most powerful man in that room surrender the right to police himself. Your petition to return to the Mediation Council is approved." A breath escaped Naomi, quiet and uneven. No applause followed. None belonged there. Luca rose, walked around the table, and stopped on the opposite side of the maid he had ordered back to the kitchen. The capos watched beneath the chandelier's amber glow, waiting for him to reclaim the room with rank or intimidation. Instead, Luca removed the household key ring from Naomi's apron and placed it gently on the table. "You will not serve this house tonight," he said. Naomi's eyes sharpened. "Am I dismissed?" "No." Luca turned the signed copy toward her. "You negotiated terms my best men could not reach because they tried to acquire a building. You protected the people inside it." He nodded to Vincent. "Record Ms. Carter as Harbor Light's independent liaison to my office. She answers to the trust, not to me." Naomi did not accept at once. "My authority includes reporting every violation, especially mine. And if you break this agreement..." Luca met her gaze as the clock marked 7 minutes from her first call. "Then you use everything I signed to stop me." Naomi lifted the pen. She signed as community witness, not servant, and slid the agreement back across the mahogany. Ruth formally accepted the preservation trust. Harbor Light would remain open, its children protected, its future controlled by the neighborhood it served. Luca extended his hand. Naomi regarded it for a moment, then shook it, not in gratitude, but as an equal confirming terms. Around them, men who had once laughed at her lowered their eyes. Luca had believed power meant making others yield. Naomi Carter taught him that true authority begins when a man binds himself to justice. And that night, the world remembered what dignity looks like.